Imagine a quiet moment in ancient history. A woman, Rebecca, is expecting her first child, actually, too. But this isn't the peaceful pregnancy she might have dreamed of. Instead of soft flutters or gentle kicks, something more intense is happening inside her. It feels like a war is going on in her womb. Worried and confused, Rebecca turns to God and asks, "Why is this happening to me?" God doesn't leave her in the dark. Answers with words that echo through all of biblical history. Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. Right from the start, this wasn't just about two babies. It was about two nations, two legacies, and two completely different destinies. Esau and Jacob, though twins, were marked from the very beginning with a divine distinction. Esau would become the father of the Edomites, a strong and rugged people, while Jacob would become Israel, the chosen nation through whom the covenant would continue. Even at birth, their differences were striking. Esau came out first, red and covered in hair like a little warrior, almost as if he was born ready to face the world. Jacob followed immediately after, grasping his brother's heel, a symbolic gesture that hinted at the struggle that would continue between them for generations. This story isn't just about sibling rivalry. It's about purpose. It's about how God chooses to shape history, not based on tradition or human expectation, but based on his own sovereign plan. Esau, though the firstborn, was not the one through whom God's covenant would flow. Jacob, the quieter of the two, the one who stayed near the tents and sought the things of God, would carry the spiritual legacy. But here's what's amazing. Both brothers mattered. Both had a role. And even though Esau's path led outside the covenant, he was still blessed. He still became a nation. God didn't forget him. Though the prophecy Rebekah received wasn't just a cryptic warning, it was a declaration of divine design. It told her and us that God sees the whole story before it unfolds, and that even the chaos in the womb was part of his plan. After years of tension and separation from his brother Jacob, Esau eventually left behind the familiar tents of his youth to build something of his own. He wasn't just wandering anymore. He was claiming a legacy. The Bible tells us that Esau settled in a rugged mountainous region known as Seir. So Esau that it. This land, full of red rocks and windswept cliffs, wasn't just a place to survive, it became the foundation for a nation. The name Edom itself means red, a reminder of Esau's appearance at birth and the red stew he traded for his birthright. It also reflects the land he inherited, the red-toned mountains of Seir, located in what is now southern Jordan, stood in stark contrast to the green pastures of Canaan. But this wasn't a punishment. It was a gift, a divine inheritance. God had not forgotten Esau. In Deuteronomy 2:5, God told the Israelites, "Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own." This verse reveals something powerful. Although Esau was not chosen for the covenant, he was still chosen for blessing. God gave him a homeland, a people, and a future. And Esau's descendants didn't just live there, they thrived. His sons and grandsons like Eliphaz and Teman became leaders and warriors. They built settlements, traded with surrounding nations, and developed a culture rooted in strength, resilience, and independence. Long before Israel had its first king, the people of Edom already had their own rulers. Genesis 36:31. While Jacob's descendants were still shepherds in Canaan, Esau's family had formed a structured society in the rocky hill. The land of Seir was no easy place to tame, but it matched the personality of Esau perfectly. Harsh, bold, and demanding, it required the kind of grit Esau had shown since birth. And in Seir, that wilderness became a kingdom. Though when we look at the story of Esau, we need to see more than just the man who gave up his birthright. We need to see a patriarch who, despite not being the chosen one, was still deeply favored by God. His land, his people, and his legacy still speak today through the red mountains of Jordan, a lasting testimony to a blessing that was never taken away. Though didn't just settle in the land of Seir, he built something lasting. What began as one man's search for a place outside his brother's shadow turned into the birth of a thriving nation. The descendants of Esau, known as the Edomites, didn't fade into history. They rose, they built, and they ruled. While Jacob's descendants were still shepherding flocks in the land of Canaan, the Edomites were already organizing into a structured society. The Bible makes a powerful statement in Genesis 36:31. These were the kings who reigned in Edom before any Israelite king reigned. This is not a minor detail. It's a glimpse into how quickly and powerfully the Edomites advanced. Esau's sons Eliphaz, Reuel, Jush, Jalam, and Korah formed the first line of Edomite leaders. Their children, in turn, expanded the nation's reach. He would go on to father the Amalekites, a fierce people known for their bitter rivalry with Israel. Though that part of the story is tragic, it shows just how influential Esau's line became. Edomite kings such as Bela, Jobab, and Husham ruled over fortified cities carved into the Red Mountains. They built stone strongholds, developed trade routes that stretched from Egypt to Arabia, and lived as desert warriors with unmatched resilience. They were a people shaped by their environment, strong, independent, and unwilling to back down. You can almost picture them riding through the canyons of Seir, wind in their hair, leading caravans and watching over mountain passes. But their power didn't only come from the sword. The Edomites also developed culture. Their society blended Semitic roots with Canaanite and Ishmaelite influences, thanks in part to the diverse backgrounds of Esau's wives. This fusion gave rise to a rich and unique people who could both fight and thrive in harsh conditions. Easy to overlook Esau because he wasn't the chosen son of the covenant. But history tells a fuller story. God didn't cast him aside. He gave him a land, a people, and a legacy. And Esau's descendants didn't waste it. They took the red cliffs of Seir and turned them into a kingdom. They built, ruled, and made their mark long before Israel ever saw the throne. Edom wasn't just a name on a map. It was a symbol of strength, independence, and the faithfulness of a God who keeps his promises, even to those outside the spotlight. Life in the mountains of Seir shaped the Edomites into a unique people, not just in strength, but in culture. As Esau's descendants settled into their new homeland, something subtle but powerful began to change. Their language, their customs, even the way they saw the world began to shift. It was the result of where they lived, who they married, and how God allowed different cultures to come together in one place. Esau's roots ran deep in the Semitic family tree. Jacob, he descended from Aram, and originally, his people spoke a form of ancient Aramaic, the same language Abraham likely used to pray and teach. Picture Esau sitting around a fire, telling hunting stories to his sons in the language of his forefathers. The flicker of flame lighting up the rocky walls of Seir. But this language didn't remain unchanged for long. Esau's wives came from different cultures and all around those same campfires. Esau's children didn't just hear their father's Aramaic, they heard the words and stories of Canaan. Slowly, the Edomites began to speak a hybrid tongue. Scholars today believe their language became a blend of Aramaic, Canaanite, and South Semitic influences, reflecting exactly who they were, a people of mixed origins but shared strength. But it wasn't just about language. Culture ran deeper than words. Living at the crossroads of major ancient trade routes, the Edomites were constantly in contact with caravans from Egypt, Arabia, and Damascus. They learned pottery techniques from the Canaanites. They traded goods like salt, spices, and leather. Some even adopted worship customs brought in by the women of Canaan, though their Semitic identity remained at the core. They were called people of the sand by Egyptians, known for their rugged lifestyle and desert wisdom. Yet even in that roughness, there was poetry. The Edomites could wield swords by day and sing around fires at night. Their culture was both fierce and rich, just like the Red Mountains they called home. What's beautiful is that God didn't just allow this blend, He designed it. The Edomites stood at a cultural intersection for a reason. Even though they were outside the covenant, they weren't outside God's plan. Their evolving language and way of life remind us that God's work is not always neat or predictable. Sometimes it's messy, complex, and deeply human, but it still carries His fingerprint. It's easy to think that the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, disappeared into the dust of history. After all, we don't hear about the nation of Edom today. Their kings no longer rule, their cities no longer stand in power. But the truth is more surprising than you might expect. The descendants of Esau didn't vanish. They blended into the modern world, and if you travel to southern Jordan today, you'll find that their legacy is still alive. The Bible tells us that God gave Esau the hill country of Seir as his inheritance. The Lord said to me, I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own. That rugged red region, marked by cliffs, canyons, and desert winds, is now home to places like Petra, the world-famous stone-carved city. And it's in that very region where history and prophecy meet over the centuries as empires like Babylon, Persia, and Rome swept through the Middle East. The Edomites were gradually absorbed into surrounding peoples. Their distinct kingdom may have faded, but their bloodline did not. Many scholars and archaeologists believe that the people living in southern Jordan today, especially in the area around Petra, still carry the genetic and cultural imprint of the Edomites. Actions on redstone cliffs, pottery, and even DNA studies all point to a continuing presence. So when you stand in Petra, staring up at the towering red walls, you're not just looking at ancient ruins, you're standing in the land that God gave to Esau. You're standing in the middle of a promise fulfilled. Esau may not have been the chosen heir of the covenant, but God didn't abandon him. The Edomites didn't simply fade. They were woven into the broader story of the Middle East, especially in the land we now call Jordan. Today, the descendants of Esau may not go by the name Edomites, but their legacy lives on in the culture, the language, and even the people of Jordan. They are shepherds, traders, craftsmen living on the land their ancestor once claimed. The story of Esau isn't over. It continues in quiet ways, through people walking the same soil, under the same sun, in the same hills of Seir. It's a reminder that when God makes a promise, even to someone outside the main spotlight, He keeps it. Every time. When we think about God's covenant in the Bible, it's easy to focus only on Israel. After all, Jacob the younger twin was the one chosen to carry the promise made to Abraham. But if we pause and look closer, we find something remarkable. God didn't forget Esau. And though Esau wasn't the one through whom the covenant would continue, his life and legacy still played a real part in God's greater plan of redemption. Esau's descendants, the Edomites, were not just footnotes in biblical history. They were a fully developed nation, blessed with land, leaders, and a distinct identity, made it clear in Deuteronomy 2:5 that Israel was not to take anything from Edom's territory. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land. God had given Esau his own place, and that gift was to be respected. One of the most fascinating twists in this story is the possible connection between Esau's lineage and Job, the man famous for his unwavering faith. The Bible says Job was from the land of Uz, which many scholars believe was near Edom. If Job truly descended from Esau's line, then from a man who once traded his birthright for a bowl of stew came one of the most righteous, God-fearing men in all of Scripture. That's powerful. Then there's Amalek, Esau's grandson through Eliphaz, who became the forefather of the Amalekites, longtime enemies of Israel. This contrast between Job and Amalek shows the complexity of Esau's legacy. His family line included both fierce opposition and faithful endurance. It's almost as if God is showing us that from the same roots can come both struggle and hope. What does that tell us? It tells us that even outside the covenant, God is still writing a story. The Edomites were not chosen like Israel, but they were still part of the larger picture. They had influence. They shaped history, and whether through tension or testimony, they played a role in the unfolding plan of salvation. In God's hands, even the overlooked are never forgotten. Esau's journey may have taken him away from the tents of Isaac, but it didn't take him out of God's reach. His people, his path, and his purpose were still guided by the hand of the Creator. So when we read about Esau, we shouldn't see just a man who missed the blessing. We should see someone who, in his own way, still mattered deeply to God. When we talk about Esau, it's easy to focus on his mistakes, how he traded his birthright for a bowl of stew, or how he lost the blessing meant for the firstborn. But if that's all we see, we're missing something much deeper. The story of Esau and Edom isn't just about failure. It's about how God's justice and faithfulness reach even those outside the covenant. It's true, Jacob was chosen to carry the promise made to Abraham. He became Israel, the father of the 12 tribes, and the foundation of a nation that would shape history. But that doesn't mean Esau was discarded. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that God still had a plan for him. He had given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own, says Deuteronomy 2:5. That wasn't a leftover or a consolation prize, it was a promise fulfilled. Edom, the nation that came from Esau, was a living example of this truth. They thrived in the harsh red mountains of Seir, building cities and trading with powerful empires long before Israel ever had a crown. And despite their later tensions with Israel, God instructed his people not to touch Edom's land. That shows us something significant. Even those outside the covenant are not outside of God's justice. God's faithfulness doesn't depend on our status. It depends on his character. Some made impulsive choices, yes, but God remained faithful to the promise he made regarding him, and that's a reminder to all of us. Even when we fall short, even when we feel overlooked or left out, God still sees, still remembers, and still blesses. What's even more incredible is how this story mirrors our own spiritual journey. Many of us have felt more like Esau than Jacob, messy, imperfect, and not quite fitting the mold of the chosen. But the story of Edom tells us that God has space for everyone in his plan. Whether you're part of the covenant family or standing on the edges, his justice is still real, and his blessings are still available. Esau may not have inherited the spiritual covenant, but he did receive a physical inheritance, a land, a people, a future. That was God's way of saying, you still matter. And even today, as the descendants of Edom live on through the people of Jordan, that promise continues to echo through time. God's justice is never cruel. His faithfulness never fades. And Esau's story proves that his love extends further than we often realize. The dust settles on the story. Something profound begins to take shape. This isn't just a tale about ancient brothers, divided lands, or old rivalries. It's about how God works through all people, those inside the covenant and those outside of it. Esau's journey, from rejected birthright to the father of a nation, reminds us that God's love reaches farther than titles, traditions, or even our own mistakes. Jacob received the covenant. Yes, he was the one through whom the promise to Abraham would flow. But Esau, Edom, the nation that came from Esau, was a living example of this truth. They had land, kings, and culture. They thrived in the harsh red mountains of Seir, building cities and trading with powerful empires long before Israel ever had a crown. And despite their later tensions with Israel, God instructed his people not to touch Edom's land. That shows us something significant. Even those outside the covenant are not outside of God's justice. God's faithfulness doesn't depend on our status. It depends on his character. Esau made impulsive choices, yes, but God remained faithful to the promise he made regarding him. And that's a reminder to all of us. Even when we fall short, So what's the takeaway for us? Maybe it's this: you don't have to be perfect to have a place in God's plan. You don't have to be first, or flawless, or the one with the title. God uses people like Esau, strong, flawed, passionate to build nations and leave legacies. And he still does that today. Your path might not look like someone else's. You might not have the spotlight. But you have purpose. Just like Esau, you are seen, you are blessed, and your story isn't over. So the next time you feel like you're on the outside looking in, remember Esau, remember Sarah, remember the red mountains that still stand as a witness to a God who keeps his promises even to those we least expect. Because if Esau has a place in God's heart, so do you.